Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and today I wanted to do something a little bit more casual, a little bit more fun, to really get back to the lore of Halo itself. And I feel like there's quite a lot of potential for this particular format, and there's a lot of things I'd like to cover, but I'm also going to leave it open to you guys to decide on what happens next. But in any case, today we're going to be looking at 10 things you may or may not have known about certain specific areas of the Halo universe. We'll extrapolate each of the 10 and actually explore the lore surrounding each of these 10 points. At the end of the video, make sure you tell me what you want me to cover next, and be sure to let me know whether you did or didn't know these 10 points. So with that said, let's get on and look at 10 things you might or might not have known about the Spartan-IIs. Spartans were just 6 years old when they were conscripted. Now this goes somewhat hand in hand with the fact that they're called Spartans. Spartan boys of ancient Greece were taken at the age of 6 and began their agoge, the compulsory state-ordered military training, as ancient Spartan culture wanted to ground the fact that every single Spartan was a warrior first. In this same vein, children at the age of 6 were kidnapped from their families and forcibly conscripted into the Spartan-II program. However, on top of this, to ensure that parents didn't start to question where all of these children from all of these colonies had disappeared to, the children were replaced with flash clones. Clones that were grown over a very short space of time, and as such had fatal genetic fragmentation. Shortly after being swapped out, these cloned children would succumb to the genetic fragmentation and would pass away from what would ultimately be called strange and unknown genetic conditions that resulted in death by natural causes. This gave the parents of the children some degree of closure, while also freeing the Office of Naval Intelligence up to be able to then use these children for the Spartan program and not really have anybody turn an eye towards them and start asking questions. Most definitely one of the darker things that the Office of Naval Intelligence has done. Spartans were originally made to crush the insurrection. It's rather terrifying to think about, but these massive 7-foot-tall Spartan super soldiers wearing a half-ton of Mjolnir-powered assault armor were not created to save humanity from an unknown alien threat. They were created to destroy the insurrectionists, an organization of rebels who stood against the United Earth government ruling of the inner and outer colonies. Ultimately, these people just wanted their colonies to be left alone by the United Earth government so they could self-rule, so that they could have agency over their own lives, and the resources that their planet produced remained on the planet to feed, sustain and support the population already on the planet, rather than the United Earth government very much exploiting particularly the outer colonies for resources that they had to feed the inner colonies. This rebellion would rise and fall away numerous times over the centuries, but at the particular pitch and cadence that this rebellion was at the turn of the 26th century, Dr. Elias Carver published what he called the Carver Findings, a deep study into civil unrest and likelihoods of outright rebellion that would either ultimately destroy humanity altogether or shove us back to another Stone Age. The results of this study being that the insurrection was just around the corner and a decision had to be made as to how to stop this from happening. Ultimately, the decision was to create a unit of super soldiers that could enter into the insurrection and cut it out like a scalpel rather than the blunt instrument of sending in the UNSC Navy. Considering the speed, strength and raw lethality of the Spartan-IIs, the very idea of them being pitted against other humans is genuinely the thing of nightmares, even to the point that the insurrectionists themselves had something approximating a nursery rhyme with a cautionary tale about the Spartan-II super soldiers. Again, consider that John 117, at the age of 14 and only a few days after his initial augmentations, he killed 3 ODSTs and severely injured a 4th. And at that stage, he hadn't even been given his Mjolnir armor yet. There were originally meant to be 300 Spartan-IIs. There were massive risks associated with both the Spartan program and Project Mjolnir, but there was more at risk for doing nothing in the face of the Carver findings that would ultimately result in full-blown civil war amongst the insurrectionists and UEG. So as such, when the project was originally green-lit, the Office of Naval Intelligence and UNSC top brass granted the full funding for up to 300 Spartan-II candidates. This, however, was not to last. Funding shortly thereafter was reduced dramatically, meaning that the amount of Spartan candidates that could be brought on was reduced from 300 to only 150 candidates. At this stage, the program was identifying viable candidates for the Spartan program. As Halsey set out in her early studies, the most viable subject for the Spartan-II program had to be a prepubescent child, because, in her words,
children's minds are more easily accepting of indoctrination, their bodies more adaptable to augmentation. The result was the ultimate soldier.
They had finally managed to identify 150 suitable candidates for the program until funding was reduced once again to support only half of that number, resulting in spaces for only 75 children. This is why, despite there only being 75 children who were acquired for the Spartan program, many of them have assigned numbers which are greater than 75. For example, in the case of Fred 104, John 117, or Cal 141. These numbers were assigned to the candidates based on the order of which they were identified. And as an additional bonus fact to this one, of the 75 children who were kidnapped for the Spartan-II program, only 33 of them actually made it through the augmentation procedures. The rest of them washed out, which basically meant that they were either crippled beyond use in the Spartan program anymore, or they died. Although it is worth mentioning that of those who died, most of them were actually cryogenically preserved, in the hopes that they could be rehabilitated at a later date and their augmentations repaired in some degree and hopefully field them as fully fledged Spartans years down the line. The Spartan candidates did, at the end of the day, represent a significant investment on the part of the Office of Naval Intelligence, and the funeral that took place, where they committed the bodies of the fallen to space, were actually empty coffins, mainly to give the surviving Spartan-IIs some degree of closure. The Spartan-IIs were told exactly why they were kidnapped. This course of action did come with inherent risks. However, it was deemed by Dr. Catherine Halsey that the risk of lying to the children about why they were taken would be significantly greater. Halsey's AI Deja suggested that the candidates be told that their parents were taken and killed by pirates, or a plague that devastated their planet. Halsey refused this course of action, deciding that the truth was much better, because if they learned the truth later on and learned that the UNSC had lied to them, they would turn on them. Deja persisted and suggested a selective neural paralysis which produced a targeted amnesia. Again, Halsey refused this on the basis that it would be dangerous enough with intact minds, let alone minds that may have memory loss that's leaking into other parts of the brain. She instead told the 6-year-old children that they had been called upon to serve and that they would become the best that we could make of you. She explained that while it would be hard to understand, they could not return to their parents, that Reach would become their new home, and their new family would be their fellow trainees. While this was an extraordinarily difficult truth to tell these 6-year-old children, it was absolutely necessary. Spartans never die. This is actually a piece of Oni propaganda, known as Oni Directive 930. When the war with the Covenant was at its worst, morale across the UNSC was at an all-time low. In a desperate attempt to bolster morale, the Office of Naval Intelligence decided to go public with the Spartan-II program when they had initially chosen to keep it highly classified. They did so as a means of propaganda, to tell heroic stories of single Spartan super soldiers standing against waves of Covenant and winning, to broadcast to the masses that the war was going significantly better than it actually was, and also likely as a cautionary tale to any would-be insurrectionists. despite that by this time most of humanity were fighting desperately to survive, let alone fighting each other. Only Directive 930 had a knock-on effect of meaning that no Spartan could ever be listed as KIA, or killed in action. They could only ever be listed as MIA, missing in action, or WIA, wounded in action. This is so that it could be said that no Spartan ever died in combat, as if knowledge got to the troops that even Spartan super soldiers were dying on the front lines at the hands of the Covenant, morale would drop through the floor, and we'd be staring down into the abyss of the very real possibility that humanity were about to lose the war and be made extinct. Spartans experienced time differently during battle than normal humans. This is of direct consequence to one specific augmentation that the Spartans received, and that is the superfibrification of neural dendrites. This is an augmentation that led to a 300% increase in the reaction time of Spartans, which could be even faster during battle when the adrenaline is pulsing, and even faster still when using Mjolnir-powered assault armour. As a consequence of this, the Spartans at the height of battle would experience something akin to bullet time. Bullet time is actually a visual effect or visual impression of detaching the time and space of a camera or viewer from that of its visible subject. It was actually first used in the original script of the film The Matrix, in relation to certain visual effects where they used multiple cameras to take split-second captures of a scene from multiple different angles to give the impression of time slowing down significantly or standing still altogether. So it'd be probably more accurate to reference it as being something more like time dilation, where time changes its speed relative to how fast you're travelling. But in this particular instance, it's the speed of the nervous impulses moving through the Spartan central nervous system that's causing them to experience time at a slower rate. It's basically like overclocking the brain. For example, at times of increased adrenal output, such as life-threatening situations or the fight or flight instinct, your brain is effectively sped up by the adrenaline, your heart rate is increased, the amount of oxygen in your blood is increased, and as such you perceive things around you faster than you would normally. This is why people who have experienced this state say that time seems to stand still but be rushing at the same time. The Spartans experience exactly this, but dialed up to 11 due to their augmentations, and it was affectionately dubbed Spartan time by Kelly 087. And was since adopted by the Spartans at large. This is why in moments of extreme stress on the battlefield, Spartans can move at speeds that are utterly inhuman, because they're actually experiencing the world around them at a significantly increased rate. It would be interesting to see this mechanic come into play in some regard in the future of the franchise. Spartan-IIs have an estimated lifespan of at least 250 years. Spartans are already a genetic cut above the rest of humanity. They demonstrate specific gene markers that make them compatible with the Spartan program, and that coincides with them being basically the creme de la creme of human genetics. But in addition to this, the Spartans received a plethora of genetic therapies during their augmentations, some of which elongated their telomerase on their DNA, as well as other cellular regenerative therapies that all have the causative effect of meaning that a Spartan lives significantly longer than the average human. Now again, it is worth noting that in the 26th century, humans can get to a much older age than they can currently. Some of this is due to the amount of cryosleep that an individual can experience during their time, as cryosleep was needed for long journeys between colonies in the 26th century. But in general, the advancement of medical science in the 26th century has led to humans having much elongated lifespans. Sergeant Johnson was in remarkably good condition in the year of his death, and he was 78 years old. The previous Commander-in-Chief of the Office of Naval Intelligence, Margaret Parangoski, at least to our best knowledge in the year of 2558, was 97 years old. And it is at least assumed that she's still alive in the current events happening in Halo Infinite in 2560. Although explicitly stated for a newer generation of the Spartans, being the Spartan-IIs, the gene therapies that the Spartan-IVs received are based directly upon the same gene therapies that Spartan-IIs received. and in the official Spartan field manual it is stated that the fighting years of a Spartan are expected to exceed a century. If you then use that as a measuring stick based on the active career of modern day military personnel, and then extrapolate out the amount of years before service and the amount of years post-retirement that a human on average has, it comes out to above 250 years. There is still a vagary surrounding this particular number, but what is known for absolute certain is that the Spartan-IIs do live significantly longer and at better health than the average human. Spartans can control Mjolnir through thought alone. Now, while it is widely accepted that Spartans wear the most sophisticated suit of powered assault armor in existence, most assume that in order to move Mjolnir powered assault armor, the wearer need only move one of their limbs and the armor will detect the muscle impulse in the skeletal muscles, interpreting it as a voluntary motion, and then moving the armor's respective articulators in order to match that motion. And while yes, there are some reactive circuits within Mjolnir that do exactly that, the true origin of Mjolnir's movement systems come from the Spartans' brain themselves. In preparation for wearing Mjolnir-powered assault armor, the Spartans' neural interface is upgraded to a specialist neural interface known as the Spartan neural interface, which is a much wider bandwidth connection, and also attaches to much more of the midbrain than the average neural interface. When a Spartan with this Spartan neural interface and a suit of Mjolnir are put together, the Spartan need only think about moving, and Mjolnir will detect this intention from within the brain before it's even left the brainstem. This signal would then ultimately travel down the spine of the Spartan out to the respective muscle groups that are needed for that particular motion, which would then stimulate the muscle into an action potential that would lead to motion. However, there's a limit to this known as nerve conduction velocity, and this is basically the limit on how fast electrochemical signals can travel through the nervous system, even the augmented nervous system of a Spartan. But before any of this takes place, Mjolnir has already detected the impulse from within the Spartan's own brain and has converted that signal to a digital signal that it then sends through its own internal circuits. And since electricity moves through circuits at approximately 90% the speed of light, thought to motion happens before the Spartan has actually even felt the effects of their own nervous impulses. So it is said that on one level the Spartan moves the suit, and on another level, the suit moves the Spartan. It goes even further than this in that the Spartans can actually control most of the aspects of their heads-up display through simply thinking about it. Indeed, just focusing on another nearby Spartan opens a direct private communications channel. Straining to see small details at a distance directly engages Mjolnir's zoom function. And in the books, entire operational functions of the HUD system, the BIOS, and the suit itself are entirely controllable by the Spartan simply thinking about it. Spartans learnt to interact in spite of their armour. Spartans wear a half metric ton of Mjolnir-powered assault armour that covers every single square inch of their bodies. And whilst in more modern lore each unique Spartan is identifiable by the number on their chest and their own unique permutation of Mjolnir-powered assault armour, it wasn't that long ago in the lore that all Spartans wore exactly the same permutation of armour with no external markers for who was within the suit. Female Spartans were frequently believed to just be male Spartans due to how powerful and fast they were, and because the suit itself was androgynous. It didn't have any particular shapes or identifying features that suggested between male and female sexual dimorphism. So to all but the most learned people who knew the Spartans intimately, all the Spartans were just these huge, armoured, faceless warriors. But nevertheless, the Spartans still looked upon each other as family, and thus needed to develop ways to communicate and interact with each other through the armour in a more personal way, without necessarily revealing any portion of their skin or taking off their helmet. This was possible by a plethora of different hand signals, which at face value is a tactical decision. Using hand signals to indicate certain orders and directions and flanks and enemy positions is relatively commonplace in military personnel, specifically special forces, but there were a few physical gestures that Spartans shared that were completely and utterly unique to Spartans and indicated a higher level of personal interaction. Nearly imperceptible nods to each other, a tiny flick of an index finger to indicate that they should open a private comm channel. Even knocking into each other or brushing past each other is not a gesture that a Spartan would do by accident. In fact, this particular gesture was a way of one Spartan asking another if they were okay, checking that everything's good. There was even what's known as the Spartan smile. Since they could not reveal their faces to each other on the battlefield, and their gold mirrored visors meant that you couldn't see their faces within, Spartans learned to stroke two fingers across the visor of their helmet roughly where their mouths would be to indicate that they are smiling or that they are happy. The most intimate version of this is when a Spartan walks up to another Spartan and does the gesture on the other Spartan's visor roughly where their mouth is. This is tantamount to almost a Spartan kiss. It's a very intimate way of saying that one Spartan is happy to see another. And last but not least, the Spartans were ID'd for the program by trace DNA on discarded vaccination needles. When candidates were still being found for the Spartan program, there was one surefire way that the UNSC could very rapidly track and trace the very specific genetic markers that were required to be a candidate on the Spartan-II program, and this was through the Outer Colony Vaccination Program, a free school vaccination program specifically in the Outer Colonies and conducted by the Colonial Administration Authority. Halsey noted that while many of the colonists would avoid registering births and deaths and even paying taxes, almost all of them would take advantage of a free vaccination program. And as a direct result of this program, they held the largest database of human DNA in existence. All that needed to be done then was have all of these DNA samples scoured for these specific genetic markers to identify who they came from, and then track those individuals down to their respective colony, while also using this trace DNA as the basis for the Flash clones. I would not have liked to be the person who had to go through all of those DNA records in order to find those genetic markers, but it also suggests that since they were only looking for at maximum 300 target individuals for the program, there could be hundreds if not thousands of other human beings out there that have exactly the genetic markers required to become a Spartan-II. And this may or may not be exactly why some Spartan-IIIs and Spartan-IVs outperform others of their class, as these individuals may just have exactly those genetic markers, and thus when going through the Spartan programs and their respective training and augmentations, their perfect genetic markers allowed the greatest expression of Spartan traits attainable for that particular class. And as one last bonus fact, of all of the Spartans, John 117, the Master Chief, the greatest of all Spartans, is actually the most average of Spartans. He's average height, average build, average strength, average intelligence. He is basically your average Joe, or average John in this case. The law would have you believe that the only thing that the Master Chief excels at is his luck. I have my own personal opinions on that, but I've already covered that before. But nevertheless, there are your 10 things that you may or may not have known about the Spartan-IIs. Tell me how I did. Were there some there that you didn't know? Did you know all of them? And are there any that I left out of this particular list that you think should be included if I revisit this again in the future? Again, pop your comments down below and be sure to tell me what subject of Halo you want me to cover next in this 10 Things series. And until then, thanks for watching. If you're new here and liked what you saw, go ahead and hit that like button and hit the subscribe button while you're at it so you don't miss my future uploads. Links are in the description to get connected and jump into the Discord community with me, and if you really love the content I'm making, consider supporting the channel over on Patreon for tons of awesome perks. Pop your comments down below if you have an idea of what I should cover next, and hang around for the end of the video for other suggested videos you might be interested in. Huge shoutouts to my patrons: Spartan10148, the Metarch of my installation, Falcon, Prophet, Phantom, Thomas, Mikhail and Irrefutable Justice, my monitors, Andrew, Cameron, Darian, Flaming Halo, Madness, Masked Owl, Michael, Spartan-0137, The Cave Potato, Uwu Master, and Wolf Eclipse, my sub-monitors, my growing fleet of Strato Sentinels, my ever-vigilant enforcers, and all the other awesome patrons that are helping to support the channel in a big way. Huge shout out to Todd Morrison for keeping the installation powered with that glorious vacuum energy. Much love to you all, take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.